Welcome to this new session. My name is Mary Kim and today I'll be talking about DOM events. But before that, let's define an event. What is an event? An event is an action that happens whenever a user does something to an application or whenever something happens to an application. Let's consider a user clicks on a button, or maybe a page loads, a user submits a form and sends information to the backend. We would like to listen to such events. So how do we do that? We create some functions called event handlers or event listeners. Then those functions do something whenever a certain event happens. Let's say when a user clicks a button, we would like to display more information. So that's when a user clicks on that button, that is an event, is a click event. And now what we are going to do, that is an event handler or event listener. Let's say we would like to alert something or would like to console log something, but in real world maybe we would say when a user clicks this button, display this information. So that function that is responsible for displaying that information, that is what we call an event handler or an event listener. So let's see that in practice and see how it works. So here we have our boilerplate and I'll start by creating an HTML file. So down here I'm going to link my script, and that is index.js like this. Alright, so here let me just create a button. Here we'll have a button and this will say hello. So let's quickly test if that works. I refresh. Okay, we see our button right here. So now we are going to start with the formal way of declaring those event handlers, and that was the inline. So here in the formal way we'd say on click, and the function that will be fired or the event listener is going to be let's just say alert. You're going to alert something on the screen, and in this case I'm going to say hello world, this way. And here let me just change these ones to single quotation marks so that we don't get errors like that. So this line of code means whenever I click on this button, the on click, that means whenever I click, I would like to alert hello world. And I'm adding a D here, so we give this a try. I refresh. So I click hello, you see it happens, okay? Hello world. But if I click somewhere else on this screen, nothing happens. And that is because we have specified whenever an event happens to this to this button. So if I hover here, that is another event, but we didn't declare something on that event. Here, we especially said when I click, so let me click here, you see hello world. So let me try to change this, and I said on mouse over, and that event is right here. That means whenever I put the cursor on that button without clicking, that will output that function, the hello world. So I'm moving my cursor over here, and as soon as my cursor reaches here, you see directly hello world. But this inline function is the formal way of declaring event, of adding event listeners. Now let's jump in the new way of doing that, and that happens in JavaScript especially. So to do that, I'll first add a class, or let me add an ID. I will add an ID to this button, and that is going to be, let me just say ID button like this. So I'm going to say const button is equal to document.query selector, and here I'm going to select that by its ID. So I'll put the hashtag and I'll say ID button this way. Alright, so I'll do the same thing I did before. I'm going to say button dot. Now there is a method called add event listener, and this event listener takes in two parameters. It takes in the event that happens And the second parameter is the function or the event handler. That means we are going to have, if we would like to do something whenever a user clicks there, in that case we are going to set here the click. Now here the event is the click event. Remember, in the inline way we said on click, but now here you don't need to put the on in front of click. You just say click, you put a comma, then you define a function that will execute whenever a user clicks on this button that you had selected using its ID. So I'm going to say alert, again hello world, okay, hello world this way. And if you check in my HTML, I have deleted the inline function. So if I give this another try, I click, you see it still happened, it says hello world. So now let me change it. Maybe instead of outputting that on the screen, I'll just console log that, and I go back here. Instead of alert, I'll say console log, or I'll say console.log. Okay, I would like that to be output in my console. I refresh, and whenever I click here, you see hello world happen, or hello world get logged in the console. Now we can retry with our mouse over. So here also, instead of saying on mouse over, I'll just say mouse over this way. So I give this a try, I refresh. So check the console. Whenever I hover over it, directly we see hello world output in the console. So I like this way of doing things, of separating our HTML with the JavaScript. And in this way, imagine if we had 100 buttons. So whenever, let me just add this button, and I'll say Ctrl C, Ctrl V, and here I'll say hello 2. Now instead of saying ID, this is going to be the class, because remember, an ID should be unique on the whole page. Okay, so I'm going to say class. Now instead of hashtag, here we'll have a dot. Okay, this way. If I do this and I refresh, and now here instead of query selector, I'm going to say query selector all. Okay, so now imagine if we had 100 buttons on our page. In the way of doing the inline function here, we would have 100 inline functions, and that is a nightmare when it comes to maintain your page. But this way, even if we have 100 buttons here, they are going to be maintained by this block of code, right, or this function. And this way it's easy to maintain. If you'd like to change something on all those 100 buttons, you just change it in those lines of code and you're good to go. So if I give this a try, I refresh, now we have 2 buttons, right? And here they say button.add event listener is not a function, and this is because I have to say button dot. Now here this is going to change a bit for each. Then I'm going to say for each button, let me close this, and I'm going to say here we'll get a button. Okay, and now and now I'm going to say for each button this way. Oops, now I'm making, okay, I'm going to say button dot add event listener. All right, so this is not supposed to be here, but open closing, this is supposed to be right here. So this way, that function is going to be added on each single button. So if I refresh here and I give this a try, here you see it outputs. When I hover over the second, it outputs. So even if we had 100 buttons, they were going to use the same event handler instead of each button having its own event handler. And that is a bit easy to maintain, all right? So now let me quickly delete one button here so that we don't get confused. And this one, I'm going to go back to query selector and delete this code back to here. All right, so this way we are good to go. Okay, so now I've covered the on click button, the mouse over, so we have another function called the mouse out. Okay, so this basically says when you hover over this function, nothing happens, but when your cursor goes out of that element, I mean after hovering over that element, that function is going to be fired. So if I refresh here, you see when I hover over here, when I hover there, nothing happened. Okay, but if I move my cursor out of that element, an event happens and you see hello world. But when I hover there, nothing happens. But when my mouse is out of that element, something happens, right? And that is the mouse out. It's maybe the opposite of mouse over. So another mouse function is the double click, and you say DBL stands for double and say click. So this function means whenever you double click on an element, something happens. Okay, maybe you may say whenever you double click on an element, it zooms in. You know what I'm saying? And that is a good example for that zoom functionality. I may say whenever I click on this, I double click on the hello button, it scales, okay, or it zooms in. But I'm not going to do that so that I don't confuse you. I'll stay on that logging something to the console so that you really see that the function works, right? So if I refresh, when I click here, nothing happens, okay? I click once, nothing happens. But notice when I double click, you see hello world there. But if I click once, nothing happens. I double click, hello world again. That means our double click event is working, and our event handler or event listener is also working fine. Okay, so those are some of the most used functions, or let me say events, when it comes to the mouse. Remember, here we have only been talking about masses. When we double click, that is a click event. And we have also talked about the click, I mean the one click, if I'm to call it like that, the one click event. We have talked about the mouse over, the mouse over, the mouse out. And those are the most used event when it comes to mouses and so on. So another cool event I would like to talk about when it comes to mouses is the mouse move. So that means whenever the mouse moves, we would like to do something, okay? So right here, all I'm going to do is to log hello world to the console whenever my mouse moves, okay? But you can imagine, you can do other event handlers according to what type of things or what type of task you'd like to do whenever your mouse moves on the page. So notice where my mouse is. Whenever it reaches my page, wait a minute, here I said, let me change my function real quick. So here instead of button, I'm going to say window, and window means my entire web page. So that means whenever my mouse moves on my entire web page, we are going to log something to the console. So here I'm out of my page. So if I drag my mouse to my page, you see, check the console, it's 36, you see, it's logging hello world to the console each time my mouse moves, right? Now we have 560 hello worlds, and that means my mouse has moved 560 times. That's pretty cool, right? So now let's jump into the second part of most used events, and those are the keyboard events. Here we've been talking about the mouse event and so on. Now let's talk about the keyboard event. So for the keyboard event, I'm going to talk about three keyboard events. We have on key down, on key up, and on key press. Okay, that means we're going to fire an event whenever a key is down. So whenever you press the key and you don't leave it, that means the key is down. On key up, that means after pressing the key, when you leave the key, we are going to fire an event. And whenever you click, okay, let me say whenever you click on a key, understand it that way, whenever you do that, we are going to also have another event, right? So here I'm going to change it a little bit so that you see that it really works, right? So here I'm going to say key pressed, okay? Or now I'm going to say key down, and the event is going to change. Now we are no longer talking about mouses or mouse event. Now they are key events. And when I say on key down, that means if we were to do it here, we're going to say on key down, and you see it there, on key down, on key press, and on key up. But we are not doing that in that way. We are using add event listener, and you drop that on, and here it's going to become key down. Okay, so whenever you press a key and it's still down, we are going to log something to the console. So if I refresh, okay, I press a key, you see already key down. And here I'm not pressing this hello, and let me remove it so that you see that it really works. So here I'm not having any button, it's empty. But check on the console, I'm pressing one key and you see key down. But now it seems that it works like whenever I click on the key, a function fires, but it's not that. And to prove that to you, let me press a key and still pressing. You see, when I'm still pressing, an event fires. You see 100 key down logged to the console. But whenever I stop pressing the key, you see the function is no longer firing, it has stopped. And that's how you can you can confuse it with an on click. But it's not really an on click, and if you want to prove that, hold the key, press the key and hold it, you'll see the event will still fire. But the opposite of that function, of that event is key up. Okay, and that means after pressing a key, when you stop pressing that key, the event will fire now. So let me press a key. Now I'm pressing a key, but no event is being fired to my console. So when I stop pressing that, you see now an event has happened. Okay, and that is the difference between the on key up and on key down. Okay, so let me change maybe this log, and instead of key down, I'm going to say key up. All right, I refresh, I press, nothing happens. But when I stop pressing, you see something is being logged to the console. But for the key down event, it's when I'm still pressing the key that the event is fired. And beside that, we have now, after on key down and key up, we are going to have the key press, okay? The key press. And that means when you press the key, and that's basically like a combination of on key up and on key down. Because when I press a key here, you see, it happens. When I press for a long time, it still happens. When I press once, it happens. And that's how the key press work, right? It's a little bit like the on click, okay? On click, key press, they really work the same. So basically, those are the two most used types of events: the mouse events, and we have also the keyboard events.